Psychological wellbeing is quite an interesting term because it's only really come into play, I'd say, in the last 20 or 30 years or so in the workplace. Previously, people used to talk about things like job satisfaction or job stress, or more recently, employee engagement. And I think psychological wellbeing is more of a kind of umbrella term that refers to all those things and more. Essentially, it refers to how people feel, going from just ordinary everyday moods and emotions right through, I guess, to also clinical conditions like depression. So I think it's really best thought of as an umbrella term for a range of feelings that people might experience at work. Managers, I think, should care about psychological well-being at work. I mean, for all kinds of reasons. One, I think, is an ethical reason. I think managers and organisations have a responsibility to look after the well-being of their employees, both in law and I think morally as well. So I think that's one reason they should care. I think the other reason they should care is because certainly it is the case that there is some evidence that how people feel at work affects their performance. Now, these links are not obvious, but they are there. The better evidence does suggest there are some links, particularly around performance such as going the extra mile, or what people sometimes call organisational citizenship behaviour, which is where people go out of their way to actually help other people and help the organisation. So there are links between how people feel and those kind of behaviours, certainly. So I think both for practical and moral reasons, there's good evidence, I think, to pay attention to, yeah. I think if you're trying to think about how psychological well-being is affected by organisations and managers, I think one of the most useful concepts is the psychological contract. And essentially what that means is the implicit agreement between employers and their employees, which says this is the kind of real deal, that if you do this stuff, we'll give you this good stuff in return. And for me, one of the most telling things when psychological well-being is either going up or enhanced or is going wrong or declining in some way is that there's something wrong with that contract. Most typically what organisations do, either deliberately or accidentally, is they break promises. They imply to individuals, for example, that if they work hard, they keep their nose clean, they do the right kind of thing, then in return, they, for example, will get promoted or get a pay rise. Now, if that does not materialise, the individual may feel that that deal has been broken in some way, they may feel angry, they may withdraw efforts and so on. So I think for managers in particular, understanding what the people they manage want and what they want to give and what they want in return is a very important basis for thinking about how employees feel and what managers can do to shape that. For managers to try and manage the psychological contract, and this is not easy, I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, but I think what they need to do is really try and understand better what they as an individual manager, what the organisation can give and what their team members can give back in return. And that requires really paying a lot of attention to what people are doing and also talking to them. And this is something managers typically often want to avoid for all kinds of reasons, but actually trying to understand each person they work with as an individual. Because the other really striking thing about the psychological contract is often people want quite different things. They want to give different things at work and they want to get different things back. And I think for a manager, if the more they can understand that, the more they'll be able to manage that deal. And I think the more they'll be able to manage the well-being of their employees. If the psychological well-being of employees gets really significantly eroded at work, I think you're moving there probably into clinical psychology territory where people may be depressed or have actual clinical sort of conditions. But moving perhaps a bit above that, as it were, to just sort of normal, everyday, very negative feelings, I think the main things that can happen are around withdrawal of effort. I think what individuals do when they feel unhappy is they don't want to try anymore. They think, why should I bother trying? So that's one key, I guess, performance issue. The other thing, if people particularly are angry, for example, and I think it is important to talk about specific feelings here, not just general psychological well-being. If people are angry, they may be thinking about retribution, getting their own back, redressing the balance in some ways. So I think when we're considering the impact of reduced psychological well-being, we have to think about specific emotions and specific feelings because they will be different and have different kinds of effects. So again, it's really back on the manager in a way to watch this and understand how the people they're managing are actually reacting to things and what that means for their behaviour. I think if you're a manager right now who wants to try and understand more about the psychological well-being of the people they're working with and the people they manage, I think this sounds a bit odd, but I think the first thing is to actually think about how you're feeling yourself. I think a lot of managers are clearly under pressure to do things, they're under pressure from the people that manage them, and often the way they are being individually managed obviously has trickle-down effects in the way they manage other people. So I think understanding how you as a manager are actually feeling about yourself, your work, your organisation is a very important starting point, because the chances are if you feel upset or happy or excited or whatever by different things, so the people you're working with. So I think that's the first start. I think the second thing you can do is actually through conversations with people, talking to them about what they want to get out of work, the things they aspire to do, where they see themselves in a few months or a year's time, whether they're happy, whether they want other things to be happening at work for them. I think that's another very important way of understanding feelings. Generally saying to people, how are you feeling, isn't a great way of finding out how people are feeling. I think if you say to people, what do you want, what are you getting, what are you not getting that you think you might want, I think is a much better way of getting in and tapping how people are feeling about the work they do and the organisation they work in.